He was sitting in the break room drinking cold coffee when the call came through. Suspended, grounded, finished, according to his supervisor, just a reckless driver with too many complaints on his file. Nobody in that building thought Marcus Reyes was anything special. But in 47 minutes, a senator would be bleeding out inside a crumpled SUV on the I-90 corridor, every other unit would be stuck behind a wall of fire and twisted metal, and dispatch would have no choice but to make one desperate call to the one man they had just thrown off the roster. What happened next would shake that entire department to its core. The suspension letter was still on the table in front of him. Marcus had not folded it, had not tucked it away. He just let it sit there, face up, the words, "pending internal review," blurring slightly at the edges, because he had read it so many times the ink felt permanent behind his eyes. Station 12 on the south side of Carver City was not a glamorous posting. 3 rigs, a rotating crew of 11, a break room that smelled permanently of burnt microwave popcorn, and a chief named Gerald Holt, who had been running this station with the same iron-fisted mediocrity for going on 16 years. Holt was the kind of man who confused caution with competence. He wore that confusion like a badge. It was Holt who had filed the complaints, 3 of them in the past 2 months. Excessive speed on residential approach, failure to decelerate at a controlled intersection, unnecessary risk to personnel and civilian vehicles. Each complaint was written in Holt's cramped, precise handwriting, the handwriting of someone who had never once had to make a decision under real pressure, and didn't understand why anyone else needed to either. Marcus set down his coffee cup. It made a small sound in the empty room. Outside, through the bay doors that had been left cracked open, he could hear the other crew members moving around the rigs, voices, laughter, the metallic clang of equipment being checked. His equipment technically, his rig technically. The unit he had driven for 6 years without a single patient lost in transport. Not one. A record that Holt had never once acknowledged in any of those 3 complaint forms. His partner, Desiree Campos, appeared in the doorway of the break room. She was 29, 4 years his junior, and she had the particular expression she always wore when she was carrying bad news and didn't know how to put it down gently. "Holt's in his office," she said. "He's talking to someone from dispatch oversight. They might make the suspension official by end of shift." Marcus looked at her. "Okay." "Okay?" She stepped fully into the room. "That's it? You've got the best response time record in this district, and he's going to burn you over 3 calls where nobody got hurt, and we got there faster than any other unit would have. You're just going to sit here and say, okay? What do you want me to say, Desiree?" She pulled out the chair across from him and dropped into it. "I want you to fight it. I want you to go in there and tell him that the Ortega call alone would have been a fatality if you'd taken the approved route. The woman was coding. 7 minutes would have killed her. You got there in 4. And he wrote it up as reckless driving on a school zone adjacent street. Because he's an idiot." Marcus almost smiled. Almost. "He's the chief." She stared at him for a moment, the way people stare at someone they're trying to figure out from the inside. Desiree had been his partner for 3 years. She knew him better than most. But there were parts of Marcus Reyes that he had never shown anyone in that station, and she could feel the outline of those parts, even if she couldn't see them clearly. "You know what your problem is?" she said finally. "You're about to tell me. You let people underestimate you. You almost prefer it." He picked up his coffee cup again, said nothing. She stood. "The overnight crew comes on in 2 hours. If Holt pushes the formal suspension through before then, you'll be off the roster by morning." She paused at the door. "I just think that would be a waste. That's all I'm saying." She left. Marcus sat alone again with the letter and the cold coffee and the sound of other people moving through the work that had been taken from him. He had been underestimated before, long before Gerald Holt ever picked up a pen. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the radio in the break room crackled. Marcus had not moved. He had no reason to move, but the call that came through made him sit very still. Multiple vehicle collision. Interstate 90 eastbound near the Kessler overpass. Reports of 6 vehicles involved, at least 1 fire. Fuel spill confirmed. 2 confirmed entrapments. Civilian casualties unknown. All Southside units currently on scene with a structure fire on Merchant Avenue. District units from the north reporting gridlock approaching the corridor. Air rescue unavailable, both helicopters grounded for maintenance, and then the detail that made the dispatcher's voice tighten with something close to panic. One of the confirmed entrapments was a black Chevrolet Suburban registered to the office of Senator David Callaway. The senator's chief of staff had already called it in. Senator Callaway was in the vehicle. He was not responding to communication. Marcus was on his feet before the transmission finished. He walked directly to Holt's office. Did not knock. Opened the door. Holt was behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his face already the color of a man whose calm exterior was developing serious structural cracks. There was another man in the room, a heavy-set administrator type in a department windbreaker who Marcus did not recognize. Both of them looked up at him with the particular expression of people who believe they have already resolved the question of someone's relevance. "Reyes," Holt put his hand over the phone. "You are currently suspended pending review. You do not have access to the I-90 Pileup," Marcus said. "Every available unit is tied up on Merchant. The Airbirds are down. You've got a confirmed entrapment with a VIP in a vehicle that has a fuel spill active around it, and your northern units are sitting in gridlock on the Kessler approach." Holt stared at him. "I know that stretch of the 90, Marcus said. "I know every service road, every maintenance access point, every underpass clearance measurement from the Kessler exchange to the Hartwell exit. I can get a rig through a route that dispatch doesn't even have on file." The man in the windbreaker looked at Holt. Holt looked at Marcus with the expression of a man choosing between his pride and something he couldn't quite name yet. "You're suspended," Holt said again, but this time it sounded less like a fact and more like a question he was asking himself. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "I'm also the only person in this building who can get to that crash site before that fuel ignites." Silence. The radio on Holt's desk crackled again. Dispatch updating. Senator Callaway's vehicle confirmed front-end collision, airbag deployment, driver unresponsive. Fuel leak spreading. No ETA on available units. Holt set down the phone very slowly. He looked at the man in the windbreaker. The man in the windbreaker looked at the ceiling, and then at Marcus, and then back at Holt. "Get him a rig," the administrator said quietly. Desiree was already in the bay when Marcus came through at a jog. She had her gear half on, and her eyes were asking a question he answered by not stopping. "You're driving?" she said, falling in beside him. "I'm driving." They were in the rig and moving before Holt had finished his next phone call. Marcus pulled out of the bay and turned not toward the on-ramp that dispatch had flagged as gridlocked, but west, away from the freeway entirely. Desiree looked at him from the jump seat. "Marcus, west is away from the crash." For about 90 seconds. He moved through the surface streets at a pace that, under other circumstances, would have been the fourth complaint in Holt's folder. He knew these streets the way surgeons know anatomy, not from maps, from years of running them at hours when the city was quiet, and the only thing that mattered was the distance between where he was and where someone needed him to be. He turned south on Granger, then cut through the industrial service road behind the water treatment facility. The road was unpaved for 200 meters, and Desiree grabbed the overhead handle without comment as the rig shuddered across it. Then a left, a narrow underpass beneath the rail viaduct. Clearance on that pass was 12 feet 2 inches. The rig's profile was 11 feet 9. Marcus had measured it 3 years ago on a quiet Tuesday and committed the number to memory the way other people commit birthdays. They scraped through with 5 inches to spare. "How did you know that was there?" Desiree said. "I've been running alternate routes for 6 years, he said. Every time Holt approved the standard approach, I was already building the backup in my head. They emerged onto the service maintenance road that ran parallel to Interstate 90's eastern shoulder, a road that was technically restricted to state highway maintenance vehicles and was therefore absent from any civilian navigation system or dispatch routing map. Marcus had found it 2 years ago following a different call, a different emergency, a different moment when the approved route was going to cost someone their life. He could see the smoke before they reached the access gate. Black and thick, the kind that comes from burning plastic and rubber and fuel. It rose in a column over the ridge of the overpass and bent southeast in the wind. The access gate was padlocked. Marcus stopped the rig, stepped out, pulled a bolt cutter from the equipment bay that Desiree had not known was there, and cut the lock in 4 seconds. Back in the rig, through the gate, down the shoulder road at speed. And then they were there. The crash was worse than the radio had suggested. It always was. 6 vehicles. The initial collision appeared to have been a truck losing control on the curve, striking a minivan which had spun into the opposing lanes and triggered a cascade. 2 of the vehicles were burning. Not engulfed, not yet, but the fire was moving with the deliberate patience of something that knew it had time. Fuel from the truck was still spreading across the asphalt, and the thin stream of it was tracking directly toward the nearest burning vehicle's position. The senator's Suburban was third in the chain, front end destroyed. Driver's side airbag deployed. The vehicle was wedged at an angle against the concrete median barrier, driver's door inaccessible, the rear doors blocked by a crumpled sedan that had T-boned it from the right. Marcus assessed in the time it took him to climb out of the rig. 2 walking wounded near the shoulder. 1 person down near the minivan, unconscious, breathing, visible head trauma. A man in a suit standing beside the Suburban's passenger door, hands pressed to the glass, screaming something Marcus couldn't hear yet over the sound of fire and twisted metal settling. He grabbed his trauma bag, moved. The man in the suit turned at his approach. He was in his 40s, tie loosened, face a mask of controlled terror. "Senator Calloway's in there. He's not responding. The door won't open. The driver is..." He stopped, swallowed. The driver didn't make it. Marcus did not slow down. The passenger window was intact. He used the window punch from his belt. Clean strike, controlled shatter. Reached in and unlocked the door manually. Pulled it open. Senator David Calloway was 61 years old, a compact man who had the build of someone who had been athletic once and had not entirely let it go. He was reclined in the passenger seat at an unnatural angle, head lolled to the right, a laceration running along the left side of his forehead that had soaked his collar red. The airbag on the passenger side had deployed and partially deflated against his chest. His breathing was there, but wrong. Shallow, irregular. Marcus leaned in and put 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse, present, weak, but present. He ran his hands along the man's skull, his cervical spine, his chest and ribs, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this in the dark, in the rain, in conditions that made this clean afternoon disaster look like a training exercise. Midline cervical tenderness. Possible fracture. Chest auscultation through the shirt revealed diminished breath sounds on the right. Suspected pneumothorax. The breathing pattern confirmed it. The tracheal deviation was subtle, but there. "Tension pneumo," he said to Desiree, who was already there with the bag. "Right side. I need a 14 gauge and I need the collar." She had both ready. He applied the cervical collar first. Immobilization before intervention. The senator stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused, moving without tracking. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice dropping to the specific register he used with conscious patience who didn't know yet how bad it was. Even calm, something to anchor to. "My name is Marcus. I'm a paramedic. You've been in a collision. I need you to stay very still for me. Can you hear me?" The senator's lips moved, a sound that was not a word but was not nothing. "That's good," Marcus said. "That's real good. Stay with me." He located the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Cleaned the site in one motion. The decompression needle went in at the angle that textbooks describe and experienced hands perfect. The hiss of released pressure was immediate, audible. The senator's next breath was deeper, not normal, but deeper. "Breath sounds improving," Desiree said, stethoscope to his chest. "Still diminished, but better." "He needs a chest seal, and we need to move him," Marcus said. "Spine board. And tell me about the fuel." She looked toward the spreading slick. "It's still moving. The closer fire is maybe 30 meters out." 30 meters. At the rate of spread and the current wind, they had between 4 and 7 minutes. "Then we move him now." Extracting a patient with suspected cervical fracture and active pneumothorax from a crumpled vehicle on a 45-degree tilt, with a fuel spill closing in and no backup on scene, was the kind of scenario that paramedic instructors use as a hypothetical to test trainees' decision-making. The correct answer in the textbook is, wait for more resources. Marcus Reyes had not waited for more resources since a mountain road in Kandahar province 9 years ago when the nearest medevac was 40 minutes out and the man bleeding in the dirt beside him had approximately 8 minutes left in the world. He had learned then, definitively and permanently, that the textbook answer was written by people who had never been in that dirt. He and Desiree moved with the kind of coordinated precision that looked from the outside almost choreographed. It was not choreographed. It was 3 years of partnership distilled into muscle memory and mutual trust. She called the angles. He controlled the spine. The board went in at exactly the geometry required by the space available. The senator came out in a single controlled movement that Marcus's lower back would register the following morning as a very firm complaint. 17 seconds from first contact to extrication. They were 22 meters from the Suburban when the fuel reached the fire. The ignition was not an explosion, not the cinematic kind. It was a low, running flash, a ribbon of blue-orange that traced the fuel line back along the asphalt and caught under the SUV in a bloom of sudden intense heat. Marcus did not turn around. He was already moving. They reached the rig. Senator Calloway was on the board, secured, IV access established, oxygen running, his color moving in the direction of the correct kind of pale rather than the wrong kind. Desiree looked at Marcus over the patient's body. Her face said a dozen things she wasn't going to put into words. He had already moved to the other casualties. Over the next 22 minutes, before the first northern unit finally forced its way through the gridlock, Marcus Reyes treated 5 additional patients. The person from the minivan had a fractured skull and a cerebrospinal fluid leak he identified by the clear fluid tracking from the left ear and immediately communicated to the trauma center via radio. The 2 walking wounded had lacerations, and one had a broken wrist he was using as if it weren't. A 4th casualty, found wedged between the 2nd and 3rd vehicle, had bilateral femur fractures and was in early hemorrhagic shock, which Marcus caught from the capillary refill time and skin color before the man's blood pressure had dropped enough to register on the cuff. He initiated massive transfusion protocol on that patient using the O-negative blood stored in the rig's cold compartment, a protocol he had advocated for having on board for 4 years, and Holt had finally approved 11 months ago after initially calling it unnecessary overhead for a transport unit. Holt had no idea what he had approved. Marcus had never explained it to him. When the first northern unit arrived, a tall paramedic named Chen climbed out of the rig and stopped when she saw the organized triage Marcus had established. 6 patients, all treated, all stable or stabilizing, all tagged with color and priority markers, all documented. The fuel fire was burning contained in the Suburban's engine bay. The senator was on a monitor showing sinus rhythm with an improving oxygen saturation. Chen looked at all of it. Then she looked at Marcus. "Who set this up?" she said. "My partner and I," Marcus said. "The skull fracture in the minivan needs neurointervention. She's your priority transport. The senator is stable but needs CT, potential pneumothorax re-expansion, and cervical imaging. The bilateral femur fracture is second priority for surgical consult. He's had 2 units of O-negative and his pressure is holding." Chen looked at the senator, looked at the minivan, looked back at Marcus with an expression that was shifting from professional assessment to something closer to disbelief. "Which unit are you from?" she said. "Station 12. She frowned. "Station 12 is posted to the Merchant Avenue structure fire." "Yes," Marcus said. She stared at him another moment, then she turned to her partner and started giving orders. The drive back to Station 12 was quiet in the way that follows enormous things. The rig was empty of patients. The radio was full of chatter about the I-90 scene, the senator, the fuel fire, the casualties. Desiree drove this time. Marcus sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window in the last light of the afternoon. "You want to tell me now?" Desiree said, after they had been on the road for 4 minutes. He looked at her. "Any of it," she said. "The bolt cutter, the underpass clearance you had memorized, the alternate route that dispatch doesn't even have in the system, the fact that you ran a triage protocol under fire conditions that I've only ever seen done in trauma center drills." She paused. "Who were you before this?" Marcus looked back at the window. 68th Medical Brigade, he said. "Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq." Silence. "Flight medic," he continued. "Special operations support. The kind of work where the approved route doesn't exist, and the approved protocol doesn't cover what's in front of you, and the only thing between the person on the ground and the person they want to come home to is whatever you can do with your hands in the next 3 minutes. Desiree was quiet for a long time. "You left the military," she said finally. It was not quite a question. "I separated." He watched a traffic light change. 2014, honorably, by choice. A pause. More or less. What does more or less mean? He had not told this story to anyone at Station 12, had not told it to Holt, whose opinion he had long since stopped seeking, had not even told it to Desiree, whose respect he genuinely valued. He had come to this city and this station with nothing but his certifications and his muscle memory and the particular kind of silence that wraps itself around people who have seen things they cannot unknow. But they were on an empty road in the last of the afternoon light, and there was something about surviving impossible things that loosens the architecture of old secrets. "I lost someone," he said. "Sergeant First Class, name of Torrance Webb. We were on a case evac, and the route we were assigned was the cleared route, the approved route, the one that had been walked 3 days before. It had been remined in the interval. The vehicle hit it 2 kilometers from the pickup point." He stopped, started again. "I got out. Torrance didn't. I was 22. I'd been on the ground for 6 months, and I thought I knew everything about moving fast. And the other thing I thought was that the approved route was approved for a reason." Desiree said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when nothing was what was needed. "After that," Marcus said, "I spent the rest of my service building alternate routes. For every mission, every CASEVAC, every resupply. Primary, secondary, tertiary. I started writing them down. Then I started teaching them to the younger medics. Then I started writing procedures for how to build them in the field when you didn't have time to scout." He turned from the window and looked at Desiree. "The Army was interested in the procedures, not in me anymore. I had gotten difficult. I argued with senior officers about protocols I thought were getting people killed. Turned out I was right most of the time. Turned out that didn't matter." "So you separated." "I separated. I brought my certifications and my alternate routes and my bad habit of disagreeing with authority to the civilian EMS sector." A brief, dry sound that was approximately a laugh. "And I found Gerald Holt." Desiree exhaled slowly. "He flagged you for doing exactly what saved 6 people today," she said. "Including a senator." "Including a senator." The rig pulled into the Station 12 bay. Through the windshield, Marcus could see Holt standing in the bay. There was another man beside him, a third man. Both of them were wearing expressions that Marcus had not seen in that bay before. He climbed out. One of the men was the administrator in the windbreaker from Holt's office. The other was taller, a lean man in his early 60s with close-cropped gray hair, and the bearing of someone who had spent a portion of their life being the most important person in the room and had settled into it naturally. He was wearing a jacket over a collared shirt, and there was a butterfly bandage above his left eye, applied with the imprecision of someone who had placed it themselves. Marcus stopped. Senator David Calloway looked at him for a moment with the focused attention of a man assembling the correct framing for something he had decided he was going to say. "You're the paramedic," the senator said. His voice was steady, slightly hoarse from the oxygen mask. "They told me you were the only unit that got through." "Yes, sir. They also told me," the senator glanced briefly at Holt, "that you were not technically supposed to be working today." Marcus said nothing. The senator stepped forward, extended his hand. "My chief of staff tells me you got me out of that vehicle approximately 45 seconds before it caught fire. That your triage for the other 5 casualties was reviewed by the trauma center team and called textbook, and that you drove a route to that crash site through an access gate that apparently nobody in dispatch even knew existed." Marcus shook the hand. "I want to understand something," the senator said, "because I was in the vehicle and I was semi-conscious, and I remember 2 things clearly. The first is the sound of that fire starting. The second is your voice. Very calm, telling me to stay still." He paused. "I've spent time with military personnel in field conditions. You recognize that kind of calm." 68th Medical Brigade, Marcus said. "Flight medic." Something shifted in the senator's expression. "I served," he said quietly. Different theater, different era, long time ago. He released Marcus's hand but held his gaze. I sit on the Emergency Services Oversight Committee. I have for 9 years. Another glance at Holt, less brief this time. I'm going to be asking some questions about how someone with your record ends up suspended instead of running training programs. Holt opened his mouth, closed it. The administrator in the windbreaker was studying the middle distance with great intensity. I owe you my life, the senator said, simple, declarative, the way men who have served say things they mean entirely. Marcus looked at him. You owe me nothing, sir. This is the job. Then I want to make sure the job lets you keep doing it. The suspension review was completed in 48 hours. It was not, as had been initially described, pending internal review. It was concluded. The 3 complaints filed by Chief Gerald Holt were examined in the context of the I-90 response and, in the words of the oversight report, found to represent a pattern of flagging exemplary performance as procedural violation. All 3 complaints were expunged. Holt received a letter of his own. Different kind. Marcus Reyes was reinstated to full active duty status with a commendation. His personnel file was updated to include not just the 6 lives he had documented that afternoon, but a note from the reviewing committee acknowledging his 6-year record, 3,114 transport calls, 0 fatalities in transport, a response time average 1 minute and 43 seconds, faster than district mean. Numbers that had been in the file the entire time and had never once been mentioned in a meeting. Desiree had printed out the commendation and taped it above Marcus's locker. He took it down the first time. She put it back. He left it the second time. The alternate route protocol Marcus had developed over 6 years, his 3-deep system of primary, secondary, and tertiary access paths for every major corridor in the district, was formalized 4 months later as the Carver City EMS Non-Standard Approach Framework. The Fire and EMS Commissioner signed off on it personally. It was piloted first at Station 12, then at all 7 South District stations, then submitted for statewide consideration. The framework carried no individual attribution in its official documentation. Marcus had requested that specifically. He did not need his name on it. He needed it to work. He needed the next paramedic, some 22-year-old on their 2nd year, to have the thing he had taken years to build from nothing and loss and the particular education of roads that could kill you. Senator Calloway's office sent a letter to the station. Marcus read it once and gave it to the station's shared bulletin board. There was a short ceremony, which he attended, and for which he wore his clean uniform and said as few words as possible, and accepted a handshake from the fire commissioner with the same practiced equilibrium he brought to everything that happened in public. In private, on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks after the ceremony, he sat in the break room of Station 12 with a cup of coffee that was at least warm this time, and Desiree sat across from him, and neither of them said very much. Torrance Webb, she said eventually. Yeah. You think he'd like the framework? Marcus turned his coffee cup slowly. He'd call it over-engineered, he said. He'd say 3 alternate routes was too many and a good medic just needs fast feet and good eyes. He paused. Then he'd memorize all 3 routes and never tell anyone? Desiree smiled. Marcus almost did. He was right about the fast feet, Marcus said. I kept those too. Sometimes the most dangerous people in an emergency are not the ones who make the most noise. They are the ones sitting in the break room with cold coffee and a suspension letter, the ones who have been told too many times that their way of moving through the world is a liability, when it is actually the accumulated knowledge of every hard road they have ever survived. The system often mistakes thoroughness for recklessness. It mistakes speed born from preparation for speed born from carelessness. It mistakes silence for absence of depth. Marcus Reyes was not extraordinary because he defied the rules. He was extraordinary because he had lived long enough in hard enough places to understand which rules were written for safety and which ones were written for comfort. And he had the discipline and the grief and the love for the work to know the difference every single time. The people we overlook are so often the ones most capable of saving us, not despite what they have been through, but because of it. If that story hit you the way it hit me, let me ask you something. How many people in your life are sitting in a break room with a suspension letter that should be a commendation? How many people do you walk past every day whose capability is buried under someone else's inability to recognize it? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have ever been that person, the one who was told they were too much or too fast or not following the approved route, this channel is for you. Every story we tell here is about the moment when the truth finally comes out. Make sure you don't miss a single one. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so the next story finds you right away. If this one moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. There is someone in your life who needs to be reminded that the fire they went through was not a setback. It was preparation. We will see you in the next one.